It's our third event this semester and also our second to last. Thank you all for coming. Today we have Savvy here. Savvy is a fifth-year PhD candidate in the Department of Integrative Biology at UT Austin. They are also a volunteer with SUTS, and they have been a volunteer for a long time with SUTS. So thank you, Savvy. And Savvy, broadly, their research is looking at physiology and behavior in fish. And today the talk is going to be about the science behind biological sex. So take it away, Savvy.
Right here. Is this good? Everyone can hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Party. All right. So, welcome to my talk. It's called Genital, Schmenital, the Complexities of Biological Sex. And we'll see how this goes. So far, so good. All right. So, actually, wait, not so far, so good. So far, kind of good. Okay, now we're better. So, hi, I'm Savvy, they, them pronouns. Welcome to my trans agenda. As Tianyi said, I'm a fifth-year grad student at UT Austin. I study the physiology of specifically fish sex, but I'm really just interested in sex in general. I study fish sex. I was born in Kentucky, born and raised. I did my undergrad at Hampshire College, which is a tiny school in Western Massachusetts. And I pretty quickly found my interests in reproduction and physiology through taking like molecular biology classes. There we go. Molecular biology and animal behavior classes. I did my thesis on molecular biology and the molecular functions of reproductive hormones. I also did a fun field work with frogs. And when I was in my second year, Trump was first elected, and the natural sciences were really abuzz with conversations about the role of the sciences in society. And are sciences apolitical or are they neutral? If science itself is a method, couldn't anyone use it to support their biases? And wouldn't the vibe of the time have influenced how and what questions are investigated? And all of this really got me interested in how the social and cultural intersections of with biology and specifically biological sex. So that brings me to the question of what is biological sex? And what does that even mean? So to start, firstly, here's what sex doesn't mean. Sex is not the same thing as gender. This isn't to say that there isn't a relationship between the two, but sex and gender are not the same thing. Gender is a human social construct, and it's an idea created by people to help categorize and explain the world around us. You may not notice it all the time, but each gender comes with a set of expectations, like how we act, how we talk, how we dress, how we feel, and how we interact with other people. And gender exists and varies across the past and present and across human cultures. So gender identity and sex are not the same. Everyone's clear on that? We're good? Great. We're talking about sex, not gender. So, now, what is biological sex? So, okay, a bit of another caveat. There's a lot of funny words when we're talking about sex. So, in case anyone is unsure, this talk is about sex. You're gonna hear words that are related to sex, and I'm sure we're all aware, there's a lot of stigma around these words that can cause them to be a little uncomfortable to say out loud. And for this reason, they can also be quite funny and empowering to say out loud. Thus, we are going to hold space for all these funny words associated with biological sex by saying them out loud together, if you so choose. I encourage you to participate. So, disclaimer, I am not responsible for any feelings of unease, blurry vision, sweating, discomfort, vomiting, spontaneous combustion, or ear bleeding that may result from engaging in this activity. Okay, now, as the word shows up, feel free to read it out loud, and with me, and giggle as much as you wish to ease any discomfort. Okay. Sex.
Sex.
There we go, you got it. Okay. Ovaries.
Ovaries.
Cool. Gonads. Sperm. Vagina. There we go. Louder for vagina. Okay. Testes. Genitals. I think the iddles in this one makes it especially funny. Penis. Cloaca. Also known as the one hole to rule them all. Clitoris. Scrotum. Okay, get ready for this one. Gonadotropin releasing hormone. It's so funny. An egg. Yeah, who doesn't love eggs? Cool. So we got all our giggles out. We're feeling good. Yeah, you got it. Okay, but in all seriousness, sex refers to two different things, really. It refers to a reproductive process, such as mating behaviors, copulation, the transfer of genetic information to the next generation, doing the do. And then it's also, eventually, a category. And in this category, we refer to chromosomes, anatomy, hormones, body shape, colors, and behavior. So we will be talking about the category more than anything. But, the reproductive process also comes up a bit later. So where does biological sex come from? So it all starts with gametes, if, that's how you like to do it. So in sexually reproducing species, it's common to, there's a common assumption of two sexes, strictly classified as male or female, but what do those binary categories actually encompass? Frequently, this boils down to the cellular mechanism of cellular reproduction. And as we are mammals, and we have long assumed that the universe revolves around us, because we are mammals, we have defined all of this based off of our observations in ourselves and in other mammals, and sometimes birds, but often other mammals. So in vertebrates, the gametes, the egg and the sperm, so egg, sperm, so the gametes an organism produces are considered the basis of their biological sex and sexual variation. Within each gamete is half of the parent's genome, see, like that, or like this. So in mammals, the sperm, the smaller gamete, will contain either an X chromosome or a Y, and then the egg will contain, which is the big one, you can't tell, it's real big. This will contain at least one X chromosome. And then parents' gametes often fuse to unite these two genotypes to give rise to offspring with a novel genetic makeup, and this is called fertilization. So now we've got our zygote, and historically the sex chromosomes present in the fertilized egg, or the zygote, has been considered the basis of an individual organism's biological sex. And this is referred to also as like the gametic sex, because this is a gamete, also known as a zygote, which is a type of gamete. So this is informing our chromosomal sex, because this is where we get our chromosomes from. So chromosomal sex is defined by the sex chromosomes present when two gametes fuse, each providing a copy of the genetic material from our parents. We think of males as being this XY, which is up here. We think of females as being XX, which is the homogametic, and then this is called heterogametic. There's gonna be a lot of big words, but we're gonna be okay, I promise. The next level of organization here is called physiological sex, or the physiology of it all. And these are the hormones that are regulating the expression and regulation of the genetic information on the chromosomes. So physiological sex broadly refers to the steroid and peptide hormones influencing and coordinating the development and maintenance of sexual phenotypes. And phenotypes like all of the outside stuff that we can see, the shape of our bodies, the way we do behavior, what behaviors we do, how we look, what we feel like, all those things. And there we go. So we commonly think of males as having high testosterone, which is a hormone, and low estrogen, which is another hormone. And then we often think of females as having high estrogen and low testosterone. It's kind of boring that way, though. So when we think of gonads, this is where all these hormones come from, ultimately. The gonads are our reproductive organs, or nads for short. Invertebrates, these are ovaries and testes and all of the tubes and canals that connect them to the external genitalia. They often differ by which gametes they produce, which is like where gametic sex is sort of supposed to be tied to it all. And when we think of males, we think of testes, which produce sperm. And when we think of females, we think of ovaries, which produce eggs. Cool. So the next level would be our body shape, our body size, our coloration. This could be grouped as morphology, or morphological sex. So this includes the primary sexual traits like gonads and external genitalia, but also secondary sexual traits such as genital maturation, ornamentation, weaponry, coloration, body size, both directly and not directly related to reproduction. And these are the result of like natural and sexual selection. So they were shaped by if they could survive and if people liked it. So the last level is behavior. Behavioral sex is behaviors related to reproduction, namely those that facilitate fertilization, such as courtship behaviors like fancy dances, and provisioning, which is like building a nest or bringing food, and copulatory behaviors, which is like doing it. The male is often assumed to be a displayer, or the courter, the one that with the time and energy to put on a little show for the passive, choosy female, because God forbid women have enough standards, you know? We know this isn't true, but this is how it's been done. So let's test out everything we know. Clearly, I've covered it all. We all know what biological sex is now, right? So we could put it to the test. So I'm going to show you an animal. You're going to tell me what sex you think it is, okay? Start with maybe an easy one. So an elephant seal, do we think it's a male or a female?
Male.
That's right, it's a male. Great, everyone did a great job. Okay, the next one is an anglerfish. You think this is a male or a female? Yeah, she's the girl boss, right? For reference, this is the female, and this is the male. They're basically swimming testicles who must find a female and latch on so they can be fused to the female so that the female can use them to fertilize eggs on her own terms because, you know, hashtag feminism, hashtag girl boss. Okay, spotted hyena. Think this... Ooh, controversy. This is a female. Yeah. All of the individuals all the spotted hyenas have external genitalia, including females. Okay. So what about this lion? Is it a male or a female?
Male.
Oh, controversy. This is a male, but actually this is a female. Yeah. She's cool, right?
She looks fat.
And you know, she's got pink on her from that little dart. She's a girl. Okay, what about this one? I'm not hearing definite answers. Is it a male or a female?
Non-binary.
It's both.
Yeah.
Yeah. This little dude is both. This is a cardinal, and they're intersex, so they have female bits and male bits, and they're on the different halves of their body. So they're very organized about it. So you might be wondering why, if our categories aren't perfect, and the look of an animal, their phenotype, doesn't perfectly reflect which sex chromosomes they have, what happened? And why is it like this? Let's talk about history. So, the historical biases that have shaped this field of research. So, some historical context. But actually, really fast, I do have to go on a quick tangent, because I couldn't find any pictures that I felt like adequately represented, like, men ruining something. I was like thinking like men on bikes falling over or stuff, but none of it really felt right. So I've picked something else instead. So this instead is Dr. Rosalind Franklin, the Jewish scientist who used X-ray crystallography to determine DNA's double helix, double helical structure with sugar phosphates on the outside and all the good bits on the inside. And then she went on to pioneer the field of virology, which is using the exact same method to determine the structure of the tobacco mosaic virus. And she did all of this before she died of ovarian cancer at the age of 37. Isn't that cool? Well, the men that ruined it. So she discovered DNA structure, and with her evidence and notes, these were stolen by these buttheads on the right, well, left. left, right, left, whatever. So she was really overlooked for decades because of the dumbfounded man, specifically this one, who kind of went on a bit of a defamation campaign after she died to make sure that we could cover her up and not really recognize her for all of her contributions to this field. That should have given her the Nobel Prize, and then also should have maybe given her a Nobel Prize for the other things she did after, like pioneering virology, the study of viruses, like how you can do things about pandemics. And one more thing. It's important to know that they did all of these men, and there is also an unpictured third man, are the absolute worst in my opinion. So let them represent the problems that men like this have caused in biology because they cared more about their ego than their actual research. And before you decide to tell me that they only didn't give her the Nobel Prize because she was dead and they don't give it to dead people, I'd just like to share this fun little article that came out last week, because I believe this is probably the ego that we're dealing with here. Cool. So now that we've represented men causing problems, let's talk about history. So why do we think of sex and reproduction the way we do? And who decided that biological sex was binary? And why is sex and reproduction conflated and at least semantically separate from other biological processes? So in the late 19th and early 20th century, endocrinologists studied sex hormones, but these used to be called the chemical messengers of masculinity and femininity. They figured that these were responsible for the development of binary sex differences through the body. To this effect, three assumptions about hormones shaped research paradigms at the time. First, they assumed that hormones are sex-specific. So, okay. First, they assumed that hormones are sex-specific, so they promote the normal function of one sex while causing problems in the other sex. Second, they assumed that hormone functions were limited to, and most important for, sex and reproduction, so they don't do anything else. Lastly, they assumed that male hormones would be actively counter to female traits and characteristics, and vice versa. Female hormones would counter male traits. By the late 30s, though, or late 1930s, there was plenty of data disproving these assumptions. Nevertheless, these assumptions persisted to the extent of categorizing some steroid hormones as sex hormones, and moreover, there's the persistence of there's persistence of assigning sex to physiological, morphological, and behavioral phenomenon, which is kind of not ideal when we know that these things are really variable. So why does binary biological sex not work, though? Let this picture overwhelm you. I'm not explaining it. It's supposed to be overwhelming. Okay, so as we just saw by just looking at pictures of animals, defining sex by gametes, or really at any one level of organization, has a lot of limitations. First, gamete size is not an accessible measure. So frequently the genetic material, the chromosomes, and the phenotypic traits, behavior, morphology, anatomy, hormones, are used as a proxy for determining what sex an organism is. Gamete size and other sexual phenotypes are not universally coupled. So chromosomes, anatomy, hormones, body shape, and coloration and behavior can all vary widely from each other within and across any given sex, and within and across any given species. Natural and sexual selection typically act on phenotypic traits, which is like everything on the outside that we can see and interact with to an extent. And these are not directly on any gene or genome. The consequences of gene expression, protein function, instead are sort of proxied by, instead of the genome itself being acted upon. So, as I show in this very complicated figure, an organism may possess different combinations of chromosomes, types, gamete sizes, hormone levels, morphological characteristics, and behaviors, and they may not always align with each other under any strict category of sex. The variation in changes that we see can persist. We see in the persistence of any traits can also change throughout a lifetime of a single organism. So who likes to break the rules? Show of hands. Well, this is a safe space to break the rules. Rules are boring. Great. If you like to not break the rules, think about it. Okay, so I told you that the basic rules of how all of this flows together, but let's break them down level by level, layer by layer, to see an understanding of how they kind of relate to each other. So we'll start with the chromosomes, because that's kind of what we start with anyway. So first off, we humans typically have 22 pairs, or 44 total, chromosomes, autosomes, and then one pair of sex chromosomes. Red pandas and meerkats, for example, have 36 chromosomes. Most cats have 38 chromosomes, chimpanzees have 48 chromosomes, sharks have 82 chromosomes, and organisms' whole genome is in these chromosomes. And in other words, we are so much more than the single pair of sex chromosomes that we care so much about. So all of these things are like present. We use all of it, but sex chromosomes, they must be the end all be all, everything, right? So now, chromosomes are inherited directly from parents, and the chromosomal sex is determined by the presence or absence of a sex chromosome in that gamete. So when you have the same kind of chromosome, sex chromosome, this is called homogametic, because homo means same. When you have two different types of sex chromosomes, that's called heterogametic, because hetero means different. Cool. So there's a lot of intermediate combinations of sex chromosomes, additional gene pathways from autosomes that contribute to different developmental pathways. In species with sex chromosomes, this is the least variable level of organization within that organism. And chromosomes carry genetic material available for expression, while gene expression of the genes on any given chromosome is subject to incredible variation in expression and regulation. And the chromosome itself is more or less there for the aforementioned reason. But it's the chromosomal sex. It's either there or it's not there. This one doesn't change very much, unfortunately. But a lot of things can happen to it. So what are the different types of chromosomal sex? First, we'll have our XX, XY system. This is like what mammals have. It's what we have. So here we have an example of elephant seals, which we've already seen. So this is the big male. The females are much smaller, so they've got a nice sexual dimorphism as well. And yeah, so in this, the males will have XY, they're heterogametic, the females are homogametic. What's important here is that the real piece of info that matters kind of on the Y chromosome, because you can't really survive with just a Y chromosome, because there's not really much on it, is there's this gene called the SRY gene, which is a sex-determining region of a Y protein. It's a transcription factor. It controls gene expression. Kind of boring. But with that, that's how you can get the development of different gonads from if you didn't have it. But within this chromosomal sex system, we still see a ton of variation. So one example is you can see all these different ways you can have an X chromosome or a Y chromosome. The real thing that you just can't have and survive well is you can't just have a Y chromosome. You do need an X. You can have just an X, but you can't have just a Y, which is cool, I think. Okay, another sex system is, or chromosomal sex system, is the ZZZW system. This is really common in birds. So we have our homogametic. This here is going to be that ZZ, and that's what we see in males. And then we have the heterogametic, which is going to be the ZW, and that's what we see in females, which is the opposite of what we see in mammals. That's cool. Also in this system, it's often assumed that the homogametic sex here is going to be the one that produces the sperm, the smaller gametes, and the heterogametic one is going to be the one producing eggs, the larger gametes. So you can also have what's called a polygenic system, so a bunch of genes. Here in this specific fish, it's called a cichlid. They can have kind of both chromosomal systems. So here we have XX and XY present, and there's one way you can get a male, and then there's 3 different ways you can get a female. So that's kind of cool too. Yeah. So lastly, there's this thing called a haploid-diploid system, which is a little bit different than everything else. In this system, you get, I should say, that diploid is a fancy word for having a pair of chromosomes, so aka 2 copies of the genome, 1 from each parent. And 1 copy is haploid. So if you've got just half of a genome, that's your haploid. So in eusocial insects, the haploid-diploid means there's kind of a dose-dependent effect of the homogametic chromosome. So having 2 copies of everything gives you an extra boost, whereas having only 1 copy leads to different development pathway, less boost. Baseline, kind of. So having higher expression of the genes promoting these different developmental pathways means that fertilized eggs that have 2 copies of the genome will, become females here. The females has an asterisk, so they might not be reproducing because that's what the queen does, but if they can beat the queen and become a new queen, I think that's how you social insects work, then they get to be a queen, and then they get to reproduce. But if they only have 1 copy, then they get to be a male, and then they might get to contribute to reproduction, but they might not. They might just stay slimy and little. But there's lots of examples of this, like bees, ants, termites. Yeah, lots of examples. There's a lot of species of those things. So what comes after chromosomes? I think this is the funnest level. This is the physiological sex. Welcome. As I mentioned, in a species with sex chromosomes, the chromosomal sex is the least plastic level of organization because the chromosomes are directly inherited from the parents, and the chromosomal sex is determined by the presence or absence of a sex chromosome. But at this level, the physiological sex, this is referring to the hormones that are regulating the expression, regulating the genetic information on the chromosomes. Physiological sex broadly refers to the steroid hormones and peptide hormones influencing and coordinating the development and maintenance of sexual phenotypes, and this is including morphological traits such as gonads, genitals, ornamentation, body size, reproductive state, including maturation or puberty, the gonadal activity, gamete production, and as well also the behavioral state, which includes courtship displays, receptivity, aggression, parental care, all these things. And taken together, the timing and variation in circulating hormones, circulating hormone and local hormone concentrations affects the development, expression, maintenance of different sexual phenotypes at each of these levels, each of the ones that comes after. But also, they kind of are what gives chromosomes purpose. So where does all of this start? So in vertebrates, at least, physiological sex begins with what's called the reproductive axis. And this begins in the brain, in a region called the hypothalamus, with this really great hormone called GnRH, or gonadotropin releasing hormone. But we'll call it GnRH because gonadotropin releasing hormone is a mouthful. So GnRH is released from this region in the brain called the hypothalamus, and it binds to an area called the pituitary, which sort of dangles off the bottom of the brain. And from there, it releases these things called the gonadotropin hormones. That's where the names are all connected. You see it? Also referred to as luteinizing hormone and follicular stimulating hormone, or follicle stimulating hormone, whichever you prefer. These in turn go down to talk to the gonads. The gonads are where we get release of different steroid hormones, but as it relates here, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. These in turn go back up to the brain to regulate the release of GnRH, and then this whole axis works together to give rise to the behavioral output of mating displays and copulatory behaviors, as well as pregnancy and all those other things. But these are the ones that matter, / are fun. Cool. So steroid hormones. Also let this figure kind of overwhelm you. It's a lot. So physiological sex starts with GnRH, both during development and at puberty. And this and is also regulated by and maintained by different steroid hormones. Steroid hormones are the largest group of transcription factors in the body, meaning they directly interact with the genome to affect the expression of different genes. Not necessarily related to sex, but we often study them in relation to sex. They do this through binding these things called nuclear receptors, which kind of hold their hand into the cell and take them to the nucleus, and it's okay, now read the instructions to me, and that's how they work. So all these things have what's called a cholesterol backbone, which is this thing up here. Organic chemistry, I know, scary, but it's okay. And cholesterol is then modified by a bunch of different enzymes, both locally at tissue-specific level and also locally at a cellular level, which is pretty neat. These sex steroids often refers to progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone derivatives, but it's worth noting that all sexes of all vertebrates have all these hormones, both testosterone and estrogen. Everybody has all of them. Sex steroid hormones are also released from different endocrine tissues, such as the gonads, the adrenal cortex, skin, fat, the brain, all over the place. So these are everybody's 2 favorite steroid hormones. We attribute sex differences to steroid hormones probably more than any other molecule. We especially like to blame estrogen and testosterone. So would anyone like to guess which of these is testosterone and which one is estrogen, or like what is the difference between these two things, since they're so important? They look very different. I heard a hydrogen. Could have been from the organic chemist.
Ketone and hydrogen group.
Exactly. This guy's got a carboxy group. This one's got a... Oh my god. It has a double bond to an oxygen, and then this one has a hydrogen group. Thank you. That's the difference. That's the big difference between estrogen and testosterone. But what does this mean for the function of these two steroids? Well, there we go. See, difference. So, testosterone, start there. How do these infamous hormones differ? So testosterone, or androgens, are anabolic steroids, meaning that they build things up. Most of the variation we attribute to androgens, such as testosterone and its derivatives, is due to the fact that it is anabolic. It is involved in muscle maintenance, it's involved in the development of ornamentation, it's involved in like building up tissue, all these different things. In mammals, at least, regardless of what gonads are present, testosterone circulates at a higher concentration than estrogen, making it readily bioavailable and likely to maintain like the structure of a body. Because again, it's really important for building things up, like bones that we need to stand and move and grab things and hold stuff. Yeah. So androgens are slightly higher when there are functional testes present, but that can also be a big point of variation. So testosterone itself is more potent actually as its derivative, which if the slide will change, through this fancy enzyme called aromatase, estrogen is more potent as estradiol. Specifically 17-beta estradiol, which is locally converted by the enzyme aromatase at the cell or tissue. So estrogens are catabolic steroids, meaning that they break things down. In mammals, at least, estradiol is kept at a relatively lower concentration than testosterone, regardless of which gonads are present, but is slightly higher when functional ovaries are present, but still lower than testosterone. Moreover, if circulating testosterone is too high, you get an increase in circulating estrogen due to the tissue-specific conversion, increasing that tissue sensitivity to estrogen. That's why if testosterone is too high, you can actually end up lactating by accident, which is often not the desired effect. Estradiol's lower circulating concentration likely reflects tighter regulation than androgens, and it's probably because it's catabolic. We don't really want things to break down all the time. We want things to break down in specific places at specific times. So if you remember nothing else about these steroids, please remember this. Hormones are not sex-specific. Everybody has estrogen and testosterone is at a higher concentration than estrogen always. So say it with me, hormones are not sex-specific.
Hormones are not sex-specific.
I'm so proud of all of you. You're little physiologists in the making. You're gonna piss off other physiologists, and I'll be really proud. Great. So now gonadal sex. This will put all of the physiological sex variation into the context of this level, which is gonads and the gamete production. So gonads are our reproductive organs. Invertebrates, these are ovaries and testes and all of the tubes and canals that connect them to the external genitalia, and they differ by which gametes they produce. Again, the big difference is just the little thing that they're doing. And I guess specifically, the gonads are this right here and that right here, but it's all connected to this big structure. But I digress. So yeah, the things they produce are sperm and eggs. Great. But where do they come from? So like I said, or maybe I actually didn't say this time, gonadal sex and gonadal differentiation begins with an undifferentiated bipotential gonadal tissue. And please hold on to your butt because there's a few big words coming, but I do promise you've got this. Just take my word for it. Such as bipotential gonadal tissue. In many vertebrates, humans included, gonads arise from a shared anatomical basis, which is this undifferentiated bipotential genital duct system. Try saying that twice fast, or even once fast. Hard to do. I can't do it. So this bipotential duct system differentiates into differentiates in forms anywhere along this spectrum of the two most commonly observed pathways. And intermediate phenotypes frequently are pathologized despite being pretty normal in non-human animals and completely harmless and utterly fine. But with the introduction of specific signals at a specific time, place, and in sequence, this bipotential gonad can differentiate. So these signals include transcription factors such as SRY and SOX9, which again, they go talk to the genome and they're like, okay, make me this. And it's usually a protein, and then that protein goes to do other things. Then there's this hormone called Mullerian inhibiting hormone, or MIH, and these signals at a specific time and in sequence, along with testosterone and other androgens, will downregulate what's called the Mullerian ducts, which is the pink one, and maintain the blue one. But for all of these to function, the gonadal tissue must also be sensitive to these signals, meaning that the androgens and the MIH receptors must be able to actually bind those hormones and then be able to like talk to everything in the cell about what happens when we bind these hormones. And then if this goes off, the Wolffian system ducts remain, and we get development or maturity into testes, which produce sperm and have, which is the small gamete that requires a low energy investment. However, in absence of these, sperm, see, they're little and they swim. In absence of these signals, however, so you don't have SOX9 and you don't have SRY, you don't have the MIH hormone, and you have either lower or variation or different timing of these androgens and the tissue sensitivity required for them to do anything, then you do not get the Wolffian duct, then the Wolffian duct system is downregulated and the Mullerian duct system, the pink one, is maintained, which is neat, because once the Mullerian ducts mature into oviducts, aka fallopian tubes, which is, again, the pink tube, then these will give rise, after maturation, these ovaries will produce eggs or ova or large gametes, and then the big gametes require a lot of energy to do. So this one's a bit more taxing energetically in theory. And because this is a literal spectrum, and they produce eggs. Because this is a literal spectrum of very hormone-sensitive tissue, gonads can mature to a structure anywhere along it, meaning that if neither the Wolffian nor Mullerian system regresses, both will remain present, maturing into ovotestes, which could, in theory, at the same time produce both, or in sequence could produce both, depending on the situation. Ovotestes can produce both eggs and sperm, and this is like a solid intermediate. So the gonads and external genitalia do not always align with the sex chromosomes for any number of reasons. And due to variation in the developmental pathway or plasticity and mature anatomical structure, the present shape, size of genitalia also don't always fall into these binary categories of gonadal or morphological sex. So a ton of variation here, and chromosomal sex doesn't always have that much to do with it. So what does this variation look like? Well, as we kind of already saw, it can look like intersex mosaics. So one way we can see this variation is here in this what's called bilateral gynandromorphy, which is kind of just a fancy way of saying like an organized version of a mosaic of being intersex. So when early in development, somewhere in the body's organization, half the body is expressing one pattern that's leading to, in this guy, red or gray, or in this guy, green or blue. Personally, these colors way better. But yeah, organized mosaic. So if the mosaic is like, had a side bias. And this is kind of similar to like what we see in calico cats, sort of to go on a tangent. But we see calico cats, they have a bunch of different colors sort of all over their body. That's also a mosaic. But we can just see it really clearly, which we can't always do when it's like potentially like a sex trait and it's like things inside. It just so happens that because these guys are really well organized in how they're a mosaic, we can see it actually quite clearly right down the middle, which is really cool. And this is a northern cardinal, which you can find in the north. And then this guy is found in South America. And it's called a green honey creeper. It creeps your honey. And then another fun example of this is spotted hyenas, except their variation is like super normal for them. So this is gonadal and genital variation where everybody has external genitalia. And this structure is called I'm sorry, it's so scary. This is called a clitorophallis, which again is because the penis and the clitoris come from like the exact same developmental origin and are basically the exact same structure. It's just one is more exposed due to hormone exposure during development, and the other one is less exposed, but still like, all there. But this is super cool because when spotted hyenas give birth, they're giving birth like through a clitorophallus, which is like really unique and kind of scary to a lot of people, but they do it. See, there's the baby, it goes to a hard turn at the butt, and then it comes out right there. Isn't that cool? It is. Okay, so that was physiological sex, but now let's put it all in like a body. So body shape, morphological sex, is the physical manifestation of the gonadal and physiological sex, and that's the morphology. This comprises both primary and secondary sexual characteristics. The primary sexual traits include gonads and external genitalia. Secondary sexual traits include genital maturation, ornamentation, weaponry, coloration, body size, etc., all both related and not related to reproduction. So this can also be seen as like the result of long-term natural and sexual selection. And these can often be viewed as dimorphic, but actually more like a polymorphism. So a source of variation where you can see kind of variation along a spectrum with two extremes or multiple extremes. Morphological sex is superplastic, reflecting the variation in the physiological and gonadal state. And primary and secondary sexual morphologies exist on a continuous spectrum, not in a binary. Developmental timing and the organization and the sensitivity, all of these things are at play to give rise to anything along this spectrum. But what is really important in getting to all of this diversity? So the environment can have a huge impact. I know we love to talk about the environment, it sucks. Environmental factors affect the development and differentiation of the primary gonadal and secondary, which is the morphological, sexual traits. So one huge important piece is the nutrition availability. Sorry, my pants got caught. So this will affect gonadal development and or the maturation as regulated by like how much food is available to juveniles before they hit puberty, and can also influence when puberty occurs. Second, we have temperature. So the temperature of an egg or embryo during development influences which gonad, or can influence which gonads develop, or if the gametes want to work. The last one is just social influence. So the population density or presence of a larger or more dominant individual can influence puberty timing, gamete production, egg sperm, for the production of like egg sperm, both or neither. And then all of the input like visual, olfactory, auditory, tactile cues are required to stimulate morphological sex change in this one. So let's look at some fun examples. So the first would be lizards. Specifically bearded dragons. Bearded dragons actually have sex chromosomes, it's just that they can be kind of like ignored if there's more of a temperature influence at play. So when ZZ is present, just like with the birds, when ZZ is present, this usually will give rise to testes, which will produce sperm. However, the temperature during development can override these sex chromosomes. So when there's a really high temperature, we can actually just have ovaries instead. So also socially regulated gonadal sex, which also is like the morphological sex. It's a really blurry line between these two, and also the behavior, which we'll get to. So here's a clownfish. We all love Nemo, right? So clownfish gonadal sex is regulated by body size and the social dominance hierarchy. The largest individual in an anemone, or in an anemone group, has ovaries and produces eggs. So they're an egg producer. However, the smaller members, I'm gonna hit these buttons right, there we go. The smaller members of the breeding pair will transition into an egg producer when the biggest fish is removed. So they'll get their time in the sun, but they might have to make some sperm first. So another fun one is a blue-headed wrasse. So these juveniles are born with undifferentiated bipotential gonads. We're all familiar with that now, right? These will develop into initial phase sexes, such as an initial phase sperm producer, which is going to be a sneaker, or an initial phase egg producer. The loss of like our big guy with a big blue head in the colony will stimulate the largest egg or sperm producer to transition into a terminal phase sperm producer. So unlike clownfish, the biggest guy here is making sperm instead of eggs. And then lastly, my personal favorite are gobies. So these guys do bidirectional sex change. What this means is that the largest dominant fish in the colony will produce sperm, And all smaller fish in the colony are going to be egg producers. But unlike the other two, they're able to go back and forth throughout their life, depending on how like their social structure change or if they move, which is really neat and fun. Okay, let's put it all together with behaviors. So, behavioral sex. These are behaviors related to reproduction. They can facilitate fertilization, such as courtship and copulatory behaviors, or they can promote offspring survivals, both through aggression and parental care. But these are super context specific. They rely on somatosensory and physiological stimuli to like get them to happen. And the evolution of sex-specific behaviors is shaped by gametic investment as much as ecology, sex ratio, which is like how many of anybody is in the local community, as well as the life history traits. There's also a structure-function relationship of like the morphological phenotypes, both like the internal and external, as well as like the physiological regulation of these traits that can like, you know, give them all what they're supposed to do. Plasticity is fundamental to behavior. The same behavior in a different context can serve a completely different function. But let's, you know, look at some of this variation. So courtship behaviors are obviously very important. Prior to copulation, these are used to attract a mate. So these can include calls and vocalizations, elaborate displays, ornamentations to advertise, to get a potential mate's attention and to provide, it can also include providing nuptial gifts such as food and shelter to a potential mate, and it can also involve territorial defense to hold space containing like resources or shelter. Also, there's intersexual competition seen in those advertising to attract a mate and those choosing a mate. So you got to fight off people who are doing the same kind of dance as you, as well as the people who are like judging the dance. However, it's worth noting that historically, the effect of social hierarchy or even intersexual competition and display behaviors have been overlooked in females, which is why we know a lot less about them and a lot less about the species that do them. But it does happen, and we know like in seahorses, in some cichlid fish as well as in like some birds, like these things do happen, we just haven't really studied it that much yet. So the diversity of sexual behaviors includes like the common occurrence of same-sex sexual behavior because, you know, animals also like to do things and also are the way they are. Intersexual social bond formation uses same-sex sexual behavior. This is an indicator of both reproductive state, is also like a way to like, you know, trust, like show that you trust an individual. Like that's what bonobos do with them. And it's also really common in like single-sex species, which is like these guys. These are both females. They're lesbians. Also, this one's a male, in case you don't know. Also, these guys are my favorite. Also, these guys are my favorite. Also, these guys are sometimes gay and they like rocks. And these guys are called flamboyant. Isn't that fun? Okay, now I'm gonna tell you about my #1 favorite frog, and it's gonna feel a little tangential, but they're just like really, really, really cool. So this is called a Darwin's frog because Darwin found them when he went to, you know, get seasick in South America for several months. So in these guys, the sperm producer, the dad, the male, they'll do these calls that sound like this, and we'll see if we can hear them. Maybe. If I turn it up all the way. Let's see. Did you hear that?
Yeah.
That's what they sound like. They're really cute. And my favorite. I don't know if I mentioned. So the sperm producers will like sit and they'll call to advertise, be like, I'm here and I'm ready for your babies. And then the egg producers, the females, they're much larger and they're gonna go listen, find, and then they'll lay some eggs in front of a male. And then they're off to go find more mates. The male will stay with those eggs, will fertilize them, and then we'll just watch until they see this thing called wrigglers inside, which is like wrigglers. They're wriggling. They wriggle. You know, so this father fertilizes these eggs, guards them until they wriggle, then puts the fertilized eggs in their vocal sac, like this, eats them, but not like swallows eat them, but like eats them in like a special way. And so this is like, effectively, they're pregnant. There's like a nutrient transfer. They're doing like the same thing that like seahorses are doing, but in a different sac. But as their like babies are developing there, there's like the male will still be calling, still like trying to find more mates, trying to collect more babies to put in their mouth. And this actually has like an auditory effect on the call that like other individuals can like recognize and like can use to determine if they want to mate with that one or if they want to mate with a different one that maybe doesn't have so many babies. But like there is like this potential that like the ones that already have babies in their mouth are like a better mate because someone already trusted them with the babies. But I know what you're all waiting for. You're waiting to see like what it looks like when they're wriggling on the inside. Trigger warning for body horror, they're gonna wriggle right there. See that wriggle? Babies. This is a secondary wriggle. This is not the wriggle that they're waiting for to put them in the mouth. This is the wriggle that you see when they're already in the mouth, in case that also wasn't clear. Isn't that cool? Okay, so those embryos are developing. They'll stay there for like 50 days. So the egg's becoming a tadpole. The tadpole's becoming a froglet. I'm pretty sure it's the tadpoles that we see wriggling. And then eventually when these froglets are like good and ready, they will like pop out of the mouth and emerge. And then, you know, everyone goes about their merry way. And then they do it all over again. Isn't that cool? Okay. Oh, it's gonna play again. We don't have to watch it again. Okay, so let's get a glimpse of like what all of this variation can look like by putting it all together. So I'm gonna give you another example of a fish species. Let's call it a swordtail, because if we look at their butt, there's a sword on it. Swordtail. Get it? So in this fish species, there's a large male, and then there's 4 different reproductive morphological sexes, and they all vary by when they hit puberty. So then there's these females, right? So they have 2 X chromosomes, and they have ovaries. Nice, simple. And they hit puberty based on how much food they have access to as juveniles, much like humans and really any other vertebrate. However, the morphological males, you know, they all have testes. That's why we're calling them morphological males. However, they do not all hit puberty at the same time. These small males can be either XX or XY. And then these intermediate and large males, they're usually both XY. They're XY. They're not XX, they're XY. And they're all gonna hit puberty at a different time. So that's really weird. Also, lastly, they do all these different reproductive behaviors, which are very, very cool. These small males will do this thing called being sneaky, because they don't wanna get caught. The females don't really like them very much, so they gotta be like clever about it. And then the biggest boys, they do these like fancy dances, because the females like it. And so they'll dance, they'll wiggle, and yeah, the females like to look because they're so shiny. And then we've got these intermediate guys that do kind of anything they want depending on the social context. If there's someone there who's bigger than them and they don't want to get beat up, they're gonna do sneaky stuff. However, if they're the biggest guy around, they can do some fancy dances. So see, can all come together. So, biological sex. So chromosomal sex, as I mentioned, is the least plastic level of organization and is determined on just the presence or absence of different sex chromosomes. The physiological sex broadly refers to like the hormones that are influencing like the maturation, the development of all these different sexual phenotypes, including like morphological traits, reproductive state, and behaviors. The gonadal sex refers to the internal anatomy and the gametes they produce, and like physiological sex, this is on a continuum. And then there's ovotestes that exist as this intermediate, but there's also testes and ovaries that exist as like these 2 extremes. Then there's morphological sex, which is all the different ways a body can look. Yeah. No, come back. All the different ways a body can look. There we go. And this includes primary sexual traits and secondary sexual traits. And then lastly, we have behavior, which is kind of anything and anywhere and anytime at all that we want and might need. So ultimately, instead of restricting sexual variation and diversity to these binary categories of male and female, we can think of it as a bunch of interacting layers that are kind of stacked on top of each other and like sort of interacting like a kaleidoscope. And this can allow us to sort of account for how biology can vary across all of these different levels to sort of give rise to this one big thing we call sex. That's actually kind of 2 things, but we're gonna call it one thing right now. So, I've never been one for subtlety. And I do have one last thing to say, in case it wasn't abundantly clear. Biological sex is not binary. It's a social construct, just like gender, but slightly different because these binary categories were created by people to encompass and simplify genotypic and phenotypic phenomena observed in humans and non-human animals. For centuries, research substantiated sex as a binary, and even when recognizing the nuances and complexity of a binary male or female, they would still operate within this framework. So, we need to remember that science does not occur in a vacuum. Socially accepted gender binary feeds into the support for binary biological sex. Science isn't apolitical. It's always been shaped by culture, politics, and other social phenomena. And the erasure of inclusive research can kind of further substantiate this false narrative. So really, if you take home nothing else, just remember male and female are these arbitrary categories that we came up with because they're really handy as a shorthand, but aren't actually representative of all the nuances that we see beneath the surface. The end.
All right, questions?
I'm ready.
What differentiates a W, X, Y, and Z chromosome?
How do you mean?
Just from the diagrams that were up there.
Oh, that is such a good question. The X and Y, the Y chromosome is smaller than the X chromosome. For Z and W, I actually don't know. But we call them different things, so there's probably something. They probably have different genes on them, but I don't know if one is actually smaller than the other.
Hi, how does different hormones similar to estrogen or testosterone, progesterone, how do those affect gender identity? Well, I guess not that, but
Yeah, I know what you mean. So all of these hormones are kind of operating together. They also are all very interconnected. But the way that we have studied them has really influenced what we know about them. We often think of estrogen and progesterone as promoting fertility and support of the ovaries and all of these things, supporting menstrual cycle and all of that. And then we think of testosterone as regulating aggression, territoriality, macho behaviors. But this isn't necessarily true, but it is what a lot of the research looks at. Ultimately, they all do just kind of exist together and vary depending on different social stimuli, different physiological stimuli, sort of whatever the body needs to do. My guess is that estrogen is kind of doing a lot of the things that we think testosterone is doing, but in a very site-specific way. But yeah, they're kind of all doing all of it a lot of the time, but at different concentrations. Good question.
Great talk, thank you. So how do you integrate all of this knowledge about these different layers of biological sex into your own research at UT?
That's such a great question. So one of the things I do is I like to use more inclusive language when I'm talking about it to kind of reflect the things that I don't know, which is a lot. So yeah, I'd say that's the biggest way. I try to be much more inclusive in the language and much more transparent about what I'm doing. So when I'm talking about sex, I'm very honest about how I'm defining it in my fish, which are wait for it. These fish, which aren't mine, they're mollies, which means they're mics, which means that they belong to Earth. But in these fish, I'm really honest about it by saying that these are my egg producers. I'm guessing this based on this patch right here, and if they have that patch right there, that is a female as far as I am concerned. If they look like this to this, they're a male if they've got this little penis structure, but if they don't have that little penis structure, then I don't know what sex they are. And the only way I could find out is by looking at their genetics, and I don't often do that. Good question.
So if there's only a small male with the female, does the small male fancy dance, or does it only see?
That is actually a great question.
kind of know, but they do have the opportunity. Actually, what my research has kind of found is that if there's no large male around, the female is the one that will start asking for sex more than the male will, which is really cool, because now there's like this big gap in behavior that they can do. So sometimes the female will fancy dance, is the moral of the story.
Could you explain how social dynamics translate into things like gender change? How would, the presence of a larger male or something like that translate into like a chemical pathway? What's the mechanism that allows that to happen?
Well, so it wouldn't be gender, it would be the sex, and often it's the gonadal sex that's changing. And sometimes you can't even really see a change in like the body shape and body coloration, although in the wrasses you can. But I think in like the gobies you can. So that one's a little bit species specific. However, often the pathway is like either increasing estrogen or increasing testosterone to sort of push the gonads into a different direction. I believe, oh no, I don't remember which one it is. I don't remember which direction going, but I know that there's often like a big spike in estrogen that leads to changing what the gonadal state is, like from either testes or from ovotestes to one or the other structure. I just kind of forget which. But it's often, yeah, that kind of pathway. By increasing, this leads to better sensitivity of that tissue, which pushes it a little further.
And what about what would trigger something like that spike in estrogen?
It's usually like a visual cue, or which is like the social cue. So like they see it with their eyes, that message goes through their brain to the reproductive system, often with a different GnRH that's not the one I told you about. Or, well, that's what's thought to happen. But that system is talking to the middle part of the brain. The middle part of the brain tells the gonads get it done. Yeah. Is that it? Awesome. Oh wait, there's one more.
Of the 4 genders listed up here, or sexes listed up here, which different pairs can like successfully create offspring?
All of them.
So, okay.
Yeah, they all get to reproduce. It just depends on, they might have to deal with a bully though. That's really the limiting factor. Or if they die. But that's kind of a limiting factor in all animals and plants.
All right, thank you again, Savvy. Our next talk is going to be on December 11th, presented by another fish biologist in the IB department, Sinishka. Sinishka is right there, actually. And her talk is going to be on there are many ways to find a mate. Okay, see you all in December.
Let me tell you what happened.